pleased to welcome Jennifer Dorian to the stage. Jennifer's our program chair, and Jennifer will lead us in the program today. Jennifer?
It's always good to see more Jennies in the room. So, thank you for being here during our observation of International Women's Day a couple weeks ago and Women's History Month. Here at Rotary, we're so fortunate to have so many different great leaders of all styles, industries, backgrounds. Throughout the year, you inspire us, but today we get to hone in on some guests. I did want to point out that we are grateful to Sarah Morrison. She was going to be on this panel with us. Sarah Morrison is the CEO of Shepherd Center, you probably know, fellow Rotarian, and she is sick today, so send her good vibes, good wishes to get well quickly. I had wanted you to hear her story. She went from physical therapist to CEO at the Shepherd Center in every role, and so she has a very interesting tale to tell when you get to spend time with her. But we get now to spend a little more time with our two honored guests, which makes me happy. Our first guest, originally from Zimbabwe, Tinashe Kajisi Bolden, a multi-hyphenate. She's an award-winning director, actor, and educator. Tinashe was named the Bold Women's Leadership Circle Artistic Director Fellow for the Alliance Theater in 2019, and she is now the Jennings Hertz Artistic Director at the Alliance Theater, with many productions happening right now. As you will hear today, she has found a deep purpose and a meaning in creating art and stories that connect communities and that liberate us to imagine a more inclusive future. She's got numerous directing awards. She's got many director's credits, including world premieres of Furlough's Paradise, Nick's Flamingo Grill, Ghost, Tony Stone, Schoolgirls, or the Mean Girls Africa Mean Girls play. Native Gardens, Pipeline, and Eclipsed. She also has acting roles with credits from the Marvel Universe to HBO award-winning series to off-Broadway and Broadway productions. Coming up next in her career will be The Preacher's Wife, a new musical happening here in Atlanta, and a new opera, Forsyth County is Flooding. So we look forward to hearing more from Tinashe Kajisi Bolden, and we're glad she's here today. Thank you. I'm sure many of you know Sally Yates. She is the wife of Rotarian Comer Yates here, and today we're honored to have her speaking to us about leadership. Sally is a native of Atlanta, a Georgia Bulldog alumni. She went to Dunwoody High School, I happen to know, because I went to Riverwood. She was the first female U.S. District Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia. And in 2015, the U.S. Senate confirmed Sally Yates as Deputy Attorney General of the United States, the second highest ranking official at the Department of Justice, where she was responsible for 113,000 employees across prosecutorial, litigating, and national security components. Lucky for us, Sally returned to Atlanta 6 years ago to King & Spalding and as a partner in the firm's Special Matters and Government Investigations practice, and she leads the firm's crisis management practice. Really interesting, and most recently, Sally was named the nation's Attorney of the Year for 2023 by the American Lawyer for very important work with her team's investigation of abuse of the players of women's professional soccer. So thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
So grateful. And as Ileana would have us say, let's jump in feet first to our topic.
Yes.
You both have really interesting careers, so I wanted to start with personal journeys.
Okay.
And Tinashe, I was speaking with you, and you shared that your background did not indicate you would be an artist, your family upbringing.
Yeah. Well, let me first say thank you so much for having us. This is a really meaningful group to be around, and to have this conversation with you, Sally, I'm just inspired and truly grateful, so thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think I get the question often, where are you from, and how did you become a storyteller? And I often say that I come from a legacy of storytellers, but not in the traditional sense, but on both sides of my family are preachers and teachers and nurses and caregivers in the medical field, but every single one of them held the story of their community and would be interpreters of or brokers of their community. My dad is from Zimbabwe and was a political prisoner for most of his high school years. My mother is German American and grew up in a very small conservative town in Clay Center, Kansas. And when my parents met, my dad was in exile from Zimbabwe. And so when we went back, I grew up in colliding cultures. I grew up knowing that there are always these gaps, even in my own home, where there was this paradox of belief systems and approach to money, approach to community, approach to, you name it. There's very different perspectives of Western and African. But at the heart of it, it was, how are you going to serve your community? And so my parents never said what we had to be, but they always had to say it has to be bigger than you. And I always think about the 3 things that really defined who I am as a storyteller. The first was my dad, and being a political prisoner, it shaped the stories that he would tell us, but mostly it was the conversations that would happen around our table. We were an ANC safe house during the 1980s before Madiba was released. And so it wasn't unusual to have Bishop Malusi or Tutu to be there, and for us to hear these stories of these political prisoners through laughter and joy. So my relationship with grief and trauma is very healthy. And it's also a relationship with how do you tear down a system but build it back up even with your oppressors, right? And so how I saw community was through friction, but with faith that we're gonna get stronger on the other side. The other influencing factor was my mom. She was a nurse, a hospice nurse. And so for this young white woman to be a hospice nurse with many different tribes and cultures within Zimbabwe, and to hold those last stories that we tell, that very vulnerable time that a family gathers and passes on oral tradition, how that affected her raising biracial children in Africa really influenced my reverence for my elders, my reverence for holding on to story and being able to know my own culture and background. And then, and I love that it's women's history, but I went to a private all-girls school in Zimbabwe and Kenya. So those deep roots of sisterhood and what we can do together. And I had a teacher that would say, "Who are you uninterrupted?" And when I think about that, like, what are the things that are interrupting me and my team from greatness that is an obstacle that we can overcome, certainly as women? And so having that sisterhood really changed the way that I saw my role in this world and the doors that I want to open and the people I want to pull through. And so coming to the States, but still with such a desire to be an artist and loving the profession of storytelling. My baby sister's a surgeon, my brother's a doctor, and like here I'm an actor, and it was like I would be on, Vampire Diaries and do all these shows and think, what am I doing with my life? I wanted so much more than just being a vessel and being an interpreter of somebody else's dream. And so I'm talking a bit, but only because there's 2 of us.
This is good. Go.
I'm ceding all my time to you because this is so much more interesting.
No, but I have such deep reverence for actors, but it is a very narrow channel that you are a storyteller within. And I wanted to be part of the world building. And I think so much of the work that we're doing at our farm, back home, we have a clinic and a school there. So spatial relationship and architecture was always really fascinating to me. And so I was on a TV show, and I decided to get my master's in interior architecture. And that just gave me this sense of how do we interpret the needs of a community, of a family through space. And all along, what I was really doing was building up my toolbox as a director. And that world building that we do as a storyteller, where I'm able to facilitate the conversations of designers and actors, and how does a story sit in conversation with its community. So when I came to Atlanta, I had all these lived experiences that I think to the outside looked like I was just trying to find myself. But what I was really doing was gathering all the things I could be and do to be the most effective leader and artistic interpreter of my community. And those are the skill sets that come forward that I don't think my parents would have envisioned.
What an incredible,
as you said, conglomeration of experiences that it makes sense when you look backwards, right?
Yes,
Life always
but
makes
not at
sense
the
when you look
time.
backwards. Now, Sally, we were talking about Women's History Month, and you mentioned that your grandmother was the first woman to pass the Georgia bar.
She was one of the first. In contrast, I did not have an entirely original career selection in my family. Like, everybody is a lawyer or a Methodist minister. I mean, those were like the two career choices that you had in terms of my father, both of my grandfathers, uncles, cousins, and even my paternal grandmother. But when she became a lawyer, it was back in Georgia when you could do what they called reading law instead of going to law school, meaning that you essentially studied under an attorney. And then you took the same bar exam as everybody else, and if you passed, you were an attorney. But this was rural Georgia, not late 1930s. They weren't hiring a lot of lady lawyers in the South back then, so she ended up being the legal secretary to my grandfather and then later to my father and uncle. And truth be told, she was smarter than all three of them put together. She would let you know that too. She was not shy about that. But I just think it had to have been so incredibly frustrating for her when she knew how smart she was, but yet she didn't have the opportunities. And so she lived at least long enough. I had graduated from law school and had been practicing for 5 years before she passed away. So she, at least, yeah, we got a little sisterhood through that, but yeah.
Did you ever question being a lawyer?
Oh gosh, yeah, right. As I mentioned, since everybody in my family was a lawyer, my thought was, in graduating from college, I don't want to be a lawyer, I don't want to be married to a lawyer, and I don't want a lot of lawyer friends. I am a lawyer, I'm married to a lawyer, although he doesn't practice anymore, as you know, and I've got lots of lawyer friends. So my way of rebelling was 2 years, to hold out for 2 years after college before going to law school. But I'm so glad, I'm glad I succumbed, because once I was in law school, it made sense to me. It clicked from the very beginning. And at the risk of losing all credibility with people here, I loved law school. So if I actually love learning about this, how much more am I going to love actually doing it? And I have.
Fantastic. So we've heard a little bit about your personal journeys and career choice. Let's talk about becoming a leader. And I'm curious, as you were advancing, Sally, in the Department of Justice, did you have mentors or champions, and did they find you or did you find them?
Yeah, although, I don't know that I thought of them as a, quote, mentor at the time. I think that that's a term and actually a process that's much more intentional now. But yeah, there absolutely were. I think about, many of you all here may know Rick Dean, who's a lawyer here at Jones State. Rick was head of the criminal division when I was in AUSA coming up. And sort of the way I thought about things, not just in the quality of the work that I was doing, but the manner in which I was doing it. Was I doing it with the kind of standards that lawyers at the Department of Justice should hold? The whole time what I was thinking is I want Rick to be proud of me. And sort of the inverse of, I don't want to disappoint him. If he's giving me these challenges, he's giving me these difficult things. So, and he would, and others did as well when they might look, and I had tried to do along the way as well, to identify talent, to identify people who need that challenge, and to demonstrate one's confidence in them by entrusting them with that. So no, I was incredibly fortunate.
Beautiful. Yeah. And Tinashe, was that your experience too? Different people made a big difference in your career, or?
Yeah, well, I think for me, when I was coming up, there just weren't a lot of women in this role. There weren't, I look back at my early career and I had maybe one female director, certainly no female producers. So most of my mentors were men. But I think that I was discerning enough not to want to just model how they did it. I took the best parts of it and then would figure out where I fit in. And so then as I was coming up, what became really important was peer mentorship. And so other women who were also on that same trajectory and trying to figure it out, how we then lifted each other up. And I love what you were saying, Sally, about then how you pour back. Because I think being mentored is also in the reciprocating of mentoring. And so often I find that some of the best lessons I learn are from those folks that are coming into the business early on now.
Excellent. Well, you can't be on stage with Sally Yates and talk about leadership and not ask, how do you deal with tough calls? How do you speak truth to power? I mean, we were talking a little bit to prepare, and yeah, that's tough. You said that the deputy's job is to say no to a lot of people. So tell us a little bit about how you stand with your decisions and speak to authority.
You know, you had mentioned a question akin to this when we spoke on the phone, and I thought, I think then you had phrased it as sort of, what's your process for making hard decisions? And I thought, I've never really thought about what is my process for this. But I think particularly as one gains more experience, that I tend to be more of an intuitive decision maker, being that I want to talk to the people whose judgment I trust and whose ethos I trust as well, to try to get candid input from them, but never to sort of put it off on them as if it is their decision. And then, I like to talk about it, and then I go into a room and close the door and sit by myself a little bit and try to think about not just the decision today, but let's play this out. If I go this way, let's look around these corners and how is that going to go? If I go this way, how is it going to go? And then sometimes I tell our children when they're struggling with difficult things, if you have the luxury of a little bit of time to kind of make the decision in your head and live with it a little bit and see how it feels. And is this something that you accept kind of regardless of what the ramifications are? Are you comfortable that this is the right thing to do? Now, sometimes you don't have a whole lot of time to be going through this process. Sometimes that whole process can be an hour as opposed to, days or weeks.
That's why you lead crisis management, I'm sure.
Yeah, but also, I kind of like making decisions. I know that sounds strange. Not necessarily all decisions did I particularly like making, but I was at a holiday party at the Department of Justice, and I was there, and we were just outside the conference room where I used to work, and there were a number of other Obama appointees that were there, and I looked at them and I said, let's go in there and decide some things. That's kind of like, I think there are different, everybody has different strengths or things with which they are comfortable, and that's not to say I think I make better decisions than anybody else, but just, some people are uncomfortable with that process.
You mentioned to me also transparency played a role, that you build trust and with your colleagues, and that plays a role in standing tough.
Yeah, I think so, and that's, you hear a lot of times from people and from leaders, oh, I want you to give me honest feedback, I want you to tell me when I think, you think I'm wrong. And sometimes the rhetoric doesn't exactly match up with the reality. And, like the leader might say that, but then somebody actually disagrees and it doesn't go so well. So I think you've got to spend some time where people trust you, that when you say that, you actually mean it. That you want them to give you the candid feedback, but again, in a way where they're giving you advice and the leader is still owning the decision, because I think that's important too. Whether it goes right or it doesn't go right, that you not only have to be willing to make the decision, you have to be willing to own it.
Oh, Tinashe, that's such a director's problem too, right? You got to own that decision as the director.
Yeah, can I just sign everything that was already just copy and paste? I think that is this. I have the same guiding principles of just, I love research, and so that plays out with, I just love information. So when you're faced with a crisis or a potentially really tough conversation, getting as much information about it as possible and surrounding yourself with people that you trust but know they're going to be honest with you too. I was thinking about that quote that talks about the moment of an event happening and the decision you're going to make. The space in between is your freedom. The space in between is really the test of your integrity and who you are. And so taking that time to really play the video of, okay, if I go this route, if we go this route, how is this going to play out? Who is it going to impact and who is it going to influence? And just to continue in the trend of bringing up our kids, so I've got 2 boys. And it is so interesting seeing this younger generations, how they deal with discomfort or challenges or obstacles. If they've got math homework and they hit a problem they don't know, let me tell you, every single ailment comes out. Their back hurts, they gotta use the bathroom, they can't breathe, their head hurts, okay? But when they're playing a video game, they come up to an obstacle and they will sit there for 2 hours trying to press through because they know on the other side of this obstacle is a reward or a bonus. What if we could have a culture of people that thought, oh, I relish in challenges because I know on the other side something is going to be a bonus reward to me. I'm going to learn something or we're going to discover something. There's going to be some gain out of this hardship. And so the other part of the way that I think about raising our culture to delight in these tough decisions or be able to be receptive to it when we have to make a change in the direction is also that fundamentally they know we're going to come out stronger and better on the other side.
Sally, speaking of challenges, with the recent decision where you won a victory with the Professional Soccer League, I heard that was a very unique team that you put together. And can you tell us a little bit about that? What was it like?
Well, this goes back a couple of years when you all may recall there were a number of very serious allegations about sexual abuse and other abuse of female soccer players in the NWSL. And we were asked by the U.S. Soccer Federation to do an independent investigation and to find all of the facts and put out a report. So I put together an all-female team, which is something, if you think about, at a law firm, it wasn't that long ago when you wouldn't be able to scare up enough women to be able to field a team like that. But we had plenty to choose from at KNS. And it really made a difference when we were interviewing these women. And they were bearing some of the most really horrific experiences and had to trust us in talking about these experiences. It helped that our team was all women. And I think it was also an important statement just for big law in general that the time has come where you can put together an all-female team. Wonderful.
Hey, would you mind flipping up the leadership lessons? Both women were kind enough to share a couple of quick ones. Tinashe, I really liked what you were saying about feedback is so essential to transformational leadership. Tell us more about how you use feedback.
Ooh. Well, I think when you sort of touched on this, Sally, having a culture of feedback, it's sort of the backbone of a culture of belonging and trust, right? So that folks feel that they can safely, without some sort of reprimand, speak to power with some feedback. But I always say, you got to have the 2 C's. You can be critical, but you've also got to be creative. That if we're just always criticizing what's wrong, but we don't want to be co-authors of a plan to move forward, then it just feels like an empty vault that we're dealing with. But I think that we have to, when you are in a position of decision-making, model feedback, right? So model it in public and let it not just be something that happens behind closed doors, but that you're constantly welcoming and inviting this culture of, let's have some creative abrasion in this conversation. And by that, it means, we all are really afraid of conflict sometimes. And I think that fear of conflict is because we've not really dealt with some of the existential challenges that are happening outside of the room. And so when we have a structure in place where people feel seen, that they feel valued, that they feel believed in, and they've got the resources they need to succeed, when you have those difficult conversations, we know that we're arguing about an idea and not about each other.
And so it's funny to have a panel on women's leadership when it seems like some of these are very historically female traits, like listening, collaborating, being creative, But I also heard a lot of courage from both of you and a lot of directness. And Sally, I paraphrased you for this, but you were saying to me, leaders need to lead sometimes.
I think there's a big difference between being a leader and a supervisor. I think people in an organization want to know and to hear from the leader, who are we, what do we stand for, what is our mission, what are your expectations of us, what are the ramifications if we don't meet those expectations, what is the combined mission of the organization. And I think the leader has to say it out loud and then has to live it in the sense that the leader's behavior matches that. And these are all objectives. I'm not suggesting that, the leader sits on high and starts just issuing directives. All of the mission, the ethos, all of this needs to be informed by the people within the organization, both the other leaders as well as the other people who were being led. But ultimately, again, somebody needs to own this. And, to me, it's been when I've been parts of organizations before where it's like a reluctant leader or somebody who just really doesn't want to be doing this, and instead they're more a facilitator than a leader. And there's a time for there to be a facilitator in building consensus, and that's an important skill, I think. But there's got to be somebody there again who's going to articulate this and who's going to own it. And who's also going to, I think, I hate the word empower because it just seems so overused, but I can't think of another one right now, but to empower people to make their best decisions, not the safest decisions, not the ones that are least likely to come back and bite them if things go wrong, but the actual best decisions. And to see that if it goes wrong, that is accepted in some ways. I mean, you don't aspire to make mistakes, of course, but that you have to create that environment that's safe enough, I think, for people when you tell them you want them to make the best decisions, you want them to be bold, that you really mean it, because a bold decision can sometimes, end up upside down.
Well, it's really inspiring, and I think the secret sauce for both of you is something about this owning authority, owning decisions, and listening and learning from people who you've built positive relationships with. I know we want to take questions from the audience if there are any, so make your way up to the microphone. I have a question to ask while we're waiting to see, and that is, why lead? What's the enjoyment or the reward for you in leading?
I love seeing somebody's aha moment when you're able to create an environment for somebody's slice of genius to show up. That is so exciting. And I know that the word empowered is absolutely the hallmark, Lifetime movie word. But there is something about people feeling like, oh my God, I have alignment in what my purpose is and what the institution's purpose is. And to be able to shine a light on that is truly invigorating.
Yeah, I mean, it's gratifying. You have an opportunity to make a real impact when you have people working together for a shared mission. And also, is there anything more fun than working together with a group of people who share the same passion, the same drive, the same, again, mission? So, and you have a chance to try to again, have an impact with that.
Hi, my name is Andrea, and I brought my 15-year-old daughter with me. So in her honor, my question is, I read recently that we raise our daughters to be perfect and our boys to be courageous. And I would love to hear if that resonates with you.
Well, I think we should be perfectly courageous. I mean, I've got two boys. I mean, I think that this idea of perfectionism is so exhausting, and it just doesn't allow for the big ideas that actually live on the outside, right? Because when we send our representative into the room, and by that I mean when you send in the person that you think is going to be right for this room and say all the right things, you miss the opportunities of greatness. You miss the discoveries that happen from the stumble. So I would say reject that and be perfectly courageous.
Perfectionism is definitely something to avoid and overcome. And Gabby.
I wonder if each of you could just take a moment to share with us, or one moment that you each had in your careers where you kind of walked into your home or got in your car and you said, "I nailed that."
All right, see, how girly is this of me? I would be much more comfortable answering a mistake than something where you would say that I nailed that. All right, I got to think for a minute. Have you got one?
It was when I got my first Broadway contract. And I was not the right type. I was not the right anything. I couldn't really sing. I play a lot of instruments, but I was so convinced that I'm a strong enough actor that I'll convince you that I can sing. And my first Broadway show was, I sang the entire time. Uzo Aduba, I made my best friends out of that changed my life and are still artists that I work with today. And it's just because I believed I was perfectly courageous.
All right, this is going to sound kind of weird, but when I first became Deputy Attorney General, one of the things that I would do would be to participate in National Security Council meetings at the White House at times. And I remember going to the first one, or actually more than just the first one, and being very intimidated. I mean, you are sitting there with the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State and all of these people with deeper national security expertise than I had. And they had all been together for several years. I was in the last few years of the Obama administration. And I remember thinking, holy cow, I'm never going to open my mouth in here. I mean, this is just... And then we were a few meetings in, and an issue came up that wasn't so much about military or national security expertise, but it was more of a question of defining what we as a country should or shouldn't be doing. And I sort of mustered the courage to give my opinion on this, and I felt after, and I think it had an impact. I'm not saying like I won the room or anything, but I think it definitely had an impact on where we ultimately ended up going. And I remember being in the car going back afterwards thinking, I can do this, you know.
Yes, you can.
All right, well, John, got a question?
So I have a question. So both of you have been in situations where you are in front of a TV camera, or you're maybe an actor in a key TV series, or you're possibly giving testimony before the United States Congress. And you may have been in other situations too where particularly young women face situations where they have to continue to act, but they may be in front of people that are bullies, people that are bigots, people that have a very different set of values. And you probably want to respond, but what are the lessons you've learned? Because both of you have learned some very important lessons, I'm sure, and how to deal with those situations and still stand up to the principles that you believe are important.
I gotta be careful what I say. You know, I have been in some very interesting conversations where I think people's own ignorance has really shown through, culturally and also from a gender perspective. And what I like to do is let them talk themselves into a pretzel. Say more. Tell me more about, let's unpack this. And I find that once somebody runs out of their engine, right, of the thing that they prepared or they felt led to say in that moment, once you exhaust them with their own vocabulary, then we sort of have a level set that we can actually start to have a real conversation. And when we have a real conversation, when we're really listening to each other, the surprising thing happens that we start to see each other's humanity. And when you see somebody's humanity, you don't have to agree with them, but something happens as a human race that we want peace. We want to be at peace with each other. It's just part of who we are as people. That you can still walk away from a really offensive comment, which surprisingly happens a lot, but still feel that you didn't lose your integrity on the floor.
I wish I could be as positive as you and looking for... Yeah, I think, look, I'm not going to pretend I don't get nervous in those situations. Everybody does, but as long as I'm comfortable with both the subject matter, that I don't feel like an imposter, you know, I know, and I'm comfortable with what my positions are, even if I know every person asking me questions is going to be on the other side. I'm good with that. You know, I'm comfortable being able to go back and forth, and to me, it's not the goal to try to necessarily convince that person, but rather to be an effective advocate for the position. And I always looked at it, this is not me speaking, I am speaking and representing others here. As long as, then my job is to be an effective advocate for that position. And in a twisted kind of way, I find it a little fun.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do.
And that, you know, the sparring can be exhilarating sometimes too.
Fantastic.
So Jennifer, I want to ask a final question. You're, as a moderator, done a great job here, but you also were in a very significant position, CEO, WABE, been a key player in our club, and done a great job of moderating. You've worked your way up into the organization. Share with us just very briefly some of your thoughts about leadership lessons that you've had in the course of that experience, and, you know, frankly, what young people, particularly young women, should be taken away from that.
Oh, goodness. Well, this is a pop-up quiz. But I will have to go back, Harkin. I've given a few talks on letting go of perfectionism. It will kill you. And so I've made a career out of practicing being imperfect over and over. And some of my role models coming up were also men. And I just want to say, like, I would look at Ted Turner, and I admired him so much, but he wasn't guarded or careful about every word that came out of his mouth. And Steve Koonin, who was my boss for 18 years, was not obsessed with being perfect. And yet he was advancing. And so I was so lucky to learn that being perfect isn't part of the job of being a leader or doing a great job on the next assignment. You know, take risks. So there's definitely a long legacy of perfect women who achieved so much by being perfect and living in fear of being discovered as inadequate or imperfect. So I rejected that stereotype in my own mind, and I looked for people like Ann Richards, the governor of Texas, and I just always looked out for like more maverick women to inspire me to not be always buttoned up. That would be my one lesson I share.
Excellent observations. And I have to say, one thing unique about this meeting is, you think about it, the meeting started with Beverly. The meeting, Atlanta then shared incredible, important message, leader of the Shepherd Center. 2 Jennies today, focused leaders in fintech area with NASDAQ, leader in the residential real estate market, and now 3 key women leaders here in our community. It truly is a testament to the fact we have an outstanding group of leaders here and an outstanding group of women. So let's give the panel a big hand. Thank you for being here. And our next slide back there, Joel, that we'll show is going to be just, again, confirmation. March 25th, we've got our meeting. It's going to be service day. You'll be getting an email on that. If you have any questions about it, please feel free to talk with Gina. And then remember our April 1st program as well. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you so much.